Trump is coming quicker.
Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. Let's go. Okay, Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. We're in the last paragraph of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. Okay, so we are discussing the last part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was a little bit cryptic. It was. I don't know if you recall, but we're going to read some of the lines over here in the Mishnah. I'll summarize some of the other lines. It was a little unclear as to what was going on when we read the last Mishnah. The Mishnah said, "V'zehu she'amru." Let's review. The Mishnah had two separate cases. The last Mishnah we read had two separate cases. One case was a person who was traveling and said that they want their residence to be at a tree trunk, right? So I'm over here, I'm traveling, and I am not yet at this place, but I need to get to that place in order for it to be within 2,000 amos of my house. So I say, let my residence be at that tree trunk so I could travel further, right? So I'm not making my residence over here where I'm standing, I'm saying let my residence be there, right? That was one case. And then we had the other case of a person who didn't know of a landmark. They're traveling, that's me. I don't know about any landmarks. I don't know my way around. And so I say, let my residence be over here. I don't have any food with me. I'm a traveler. I'm someone who has nothing on me. I'm like on my way home. I'm hoping to get home. And I say, let my residence be over here. So, right? So one case where I'm saying my residence should be there, and one case where my residence should be here. Those are the two cases, right? And then we also had this cryptic statement, which was, okay, so that's two machloksim. That part's good. And then we had a statement which wasn't clear who it was attributed to, where it says, this is what the Chachamim is referring to when they said a poor man may make an eruv with his feet. Right, that was a statement. This is what the Chacham meant when they said a poor man can make an eruv with his feet. The implication of that statement is that this is some form of a exclusive case. In other words, this is something unique for a poor person, and only a poor person could do so, and in implying that other cases a poor person cannot do so. Right? That's by saying this, I'm implying that other cases is not. And I want to just elaborate on when we say poor person could mean, as we see in other places, and we saw quoted earlier by Beisham Beisilal, poor person can mean a person who really has nothing across the board, or a person who is quote unquote poor in this moment. In other words, you are a traveler and you don't have food on you, you're poor. You have a house full of food at home, doesn't matter. Right now, in this particular situation, you are poor. Okay? And then we had a machlokes in this Mishnah. Okay, I'm still summarizing. Okay, there was we had machlokes in the Mishnah. We said, Rameir said, we have a rule only for a poor person. Rabbi Yehuda said, this rule applies both for rich and poor people. Okay? And then the last statement was, we did not say to make an eruv with bread, only to make it easier for a rich person. Okay? We did not make an eruv with bread only for a rich person. If you didn't follow that perfectly, that's exactly the point. It's a little bit convoluted. It's not so clear line by line, and we're going to now see a machlokas as to how to read our Mishnah with ramifications. So Amar Rav Nachman, right? So V'zeh Amru Ani Ma'ar Baragel Amar Meir Ein Anu Ein Lanu Ela Ani Right V'chulu. It's just a quote of the whole Mishnah. Okay? Now Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, last paragraph on 51a3, Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, Machlokas b'Mekomi. The dispute between them is only when they say my Shabbos residence should be in my place, meaning the second case of our Mishnah. That's where Rabbi Yehuda and Rameir argue, where a person is standing in a place and they say my residence should be here. To Rameir Savar, Rameir holds Iker Eruv Bepas. The primary eruv is with bread. Anihu Dakilu Rabban Nilaveh, and it's the poor person who the Chacham were lenient about. By poor we mean someone who in this moment doesn't have any food, and therefore when the Mishnah says Rav Nachman saying they're arguing when a person says, "Let my Shabbos residence be in my place." Rameir holds really it should be with bread, but since this person has no food, they could do it in their place. Aval asher lo, but if a person really were to have food. Okay, let's say a person is coming from their home, and they will, let's say they're coming the opposite direction. They're sitting in their home in Baltimore, and they want to make the eruv outside of their home. They're not a traveler, right? In other words, until now we've been talking about a person coming from outside the city into the city. They're running low on food. They're on their way home. They're almost home. Okay, and and they're talking about, can I make my residence in my place without food? Rameir says, yeah, but only because he's an ani, right? Only because he's an ani, he's poor. He has no food right now, right? But a person coming from home who wants to go make his eruv, no. Aval asher lo. Okay, a rich person cannot do so, right? Because really, a person who's coming from their home, they should use bread. Yeah? Okay, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Iker Ruva Beregel. Rabbi Yehuda holds the primary eruv is being present. Okay? Echad ani ve'echad asher. And this would be true for both a poor person or rich person, meaning whether a person is coming from traveling or a person coming from their home, they could do that. They could just go to outside. I could leave my house right now, Erev Shabbos, and stand outside by a place for an eruv and say my eruv should be over here, even though I have food at home, even though I'm I'm a person who has food, right? But I can still do that. That's Rabbi Yehuda's position, okay? Aval b'makom ploni, when it comes to saying that a landmark, the second case of our Mishnah, where I say the landmark case, where I say my Erev is not here, but rather it should be over there, Divir kol ani in, asher lo. Everyone would agree that a poor person, meaning someone who doesn't have any food, yes. Someone who does have food, no. Okay, so again, Rabbi Yehuda and Rameir agree in the case of a traveler that a person could say, my Erev should be over here. The question is when it's not a traveler, right? When I'm not a traveler, when all of us, or we're all in Baltimore right now, we're all in our home, this is our general home, and we want to be traveling on Shabbos. So what we do is we stand outside the city a little bit before Shabbos, and I say, my Erev should be over here. Rabbi Meir says, that doesn't work. Really, you should be using bread. Really, you should be using bread. It's only for a poor person that you're not allowed to use bread. But this is not a case of a poor person because we're all traveling from our home. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the Iker Erev, the main Erev is with your feet, and therefore they would work even if you're coming from your home, no problem. The case where everyone, and then you have the case where I'm traveling, and I say I want my Erev to be by that landmark, right? Or whatever, I want my Erev to be by that landmark. There, everyone agrees that certainly is only for a tricky situation, i.e. a person who has no food. But a regular person, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree, to say my Erev should be by a landmark, that doesn't work for a person who has food in their back pocket.
It seems, as we mentioned a couple of days ago, that we're getting to this discussion way after it even seems relevant, because we've already been discussing where you put the food, where the...
Okay, and now we're qualifying it.
The way it works. We're certainly talking about when the sun is going to set and you can't make it back home. It's a bidiyevit situation.
That's one particular, but now we're drawing from that. The question is, okay, but now, so it was talking, the Mishnah was clearly talking about a bidiyevit situation, but they're pointing out, is the bidiyevit situation just a storyline? Or is it just, and therefore it's true for a poor person or not?
The fact that you're going to create that situation to say this is what happens, why would you extrapolate to everything else when it's clearly presented in that way? Right?
So because sometimes you give a story because it's gonna like this is a practical application of it, right? Rabbi Yehuda would say the reason we're giving this story is because practically that's usually the case. Because usually on a Friday afternoon, if you and I were here, we're not going to stand outside the city limits. We're going to sit at home. It's weird, right? So it's just either it's just giving a practical case. Or it's telling you, this rule and this case only, and it wouldn't be for other cases. I think that's
trying to give like the minimum, and then even if everybody always puts food, you don't have to.
Correct. Exactly. Okay, the Zohi Shamru, the next line of the Mishnah, which says, this is what our sage just said, when a poor person can make an error with his feet, Mankatanila, who's the author of that would be Rabbi Meir. Vayek and what's it going on? Ino makir ino baki balacha. It's going on the case where the person's making an Erev in their space. Rameir says when a person makes their Erev in their space, that's only for a poor person, right? Rabbi Yehuda would disagree with that. Rabbi Yehuda would say, no, making an Erev with your feet is always the case. And when the Mishnah says that they said bread for a leniency, who's that, right? When the Mishnah then says, and they say an Erev is to make an Erev with bread for a leniency, who's that? That's Rabbi Yehuda, because he holds the Iker Erev, the main Erev, the real Erev should be with one's feet. Bread is a leniency. Okay, fine. That's one way of learning it.
What's the source of an Erev in the first place? We have to.
It's rabbinic. It's completely rabbinic. Yeah. Rav Chisda Amar, Machlokes makom ploni. The dispute is actually in another place. In other words, Rav Chisda disagrees. He says no. Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda are arguing not in the case of in your space, but they're arguing when a person's saying, "Oh, there's a landmark." They're arguing in that case. Rameir savar ani in ashelo. Rameir says it only works for a poor person, i.e. a traveler. Rabbi Yehuda savar echad ani v'echad asher, that it works both for a poor person and a wealthy person. Rabbi Yehuda holds, according to the second version, that even a person who has food is allowed to say, my Erev is going to be at that landmark. In other words, you and I are sitting in our homes, or, and we could say, I know of that landmark by that tree, the Erev could be by that landmark, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Whereas in the first version, Rabbi Yehuda would say, no, that's only for a poor person, right? Aval bimkomi, in my place, divrei kol echad ani v'echad asher d'ikar eruv b'regel. According to this version, everyone would agree that when a person's standing in a certain place, whether it's a person traveling, i.e. a poor person, whether it's a person coming from home, i.e. a wealthy person, you can make an Erev with your feet. Meaning all of us right now, according to the second version, we could go outside the city and we could stand there and say, my Erev should be here, and that would work, even though we're coming from our home. Fine.
Rabbi Yehuda has no, it doesn't matter to him where you are, whether it's where you are or where you're going to be, it's the same everywhere.
It's the same, exactly. V'zosha amru. And when the Mishnah said, this is what the sages said when they said that an Eruv is, for a poor person, make an Eruv with his feet. Man kitanila, who is there? A mayor. Vayakai. And what parts are going on? It's going on the case of a person who was traveling, was coming dark, and the person wanted to make an Eruv elsewhere. That's the case it's going on. And the line of they've only made an Eruv with bread, except to make it easier for the rich person. Man kitanila, who does that go like? Divir kol. That goes like everyone, right? According to this version, the idea is that really making your Eruv with your feet works according to everyone, right? In this version, both Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda agree that you and I, if we are traveling from our home, we can make an Eruv with our feet. They would agree that it works for a wealthy person as well. So the last line of the Mishnah, which says that bread was a leniency, that goes according to everyone, right? Because really the main part of an Eruv, the main Eruv is really with our feet. But the Chachamim felt bad for us because they don't want us to start Shabbos, 1,500 feet from our home on Shabbos. They want us to start at home. They want us to go to shul. They want us to go be able to light at our Shabbos, whatever it is. And therefore they said, okay, fine, you can put bread out. That goes according to everyone in this version. Okay? Fine. Two versions. Now we're going to try to support one version. Tani Kvotz Rav Nachman, we have a brayso supporting the view of Rav Nachman. Echad ani v'echad asher ma'arvim b'pas. Both a poor person and a rich person are allowed to establish an Eruv with bread. Okay? Fine, with bread. So far, so good. So far, not definitive. V'lo yetze asher chutz l'tchum. And a wealthy person should not go beyond the tchum. Okay? V'yomer shvisasi b'mekomi. And say, let my Shabbos residence be in this present location. Okay, so now, right, it says a wealthy person, meaning you and I, coming from our homes, we should not go outside or go and set up an Eruv with our feet. Lefi shelo amru ma'arvim b'ragyal. They did not say to make an Eruv by feet. El lemisha ba b'derech lechashcha, unless the person was traveling. Divrei Meir. These are the words of Meir. Who's this go like? This goes like the first version. The first version where it said that they don't both agree, right? The second version says everyone agrees you're allowed to make an Eruv with your feet, right? This version has Meir saying only a poor person. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Achadani v'achadashim arva b'ragel. Both a poor person and a rich person are allowed to make an Eruv with at the present site. V'yetze asher chutz l'tchum, and therefore a wealthy person, meaning you and I, we're wealthy. We have a home. You're wealthy. A wealthy person is allowed to leave their home on before Shabbos and say my Shabbos residence should be at this place. V'zewi karashal Eruv, and this is the essence of an Eruv. Yitzir cham leval bayis, and not only that, but the cham allowed a homeowner lishloach eruvo to send his Eruv to a designated place. Biad avdo, biad beno, biad shlucho, b'shvil lahakel alav. In order to be lenient. Bottom line is, we see this version does match up with the view of Rav Nachman, who says that they are arguing about the case where whether a wealthy person could make an Eruv with their feet. We have them arguing about that as opposed to both agreeing, right? And that goes like the first version, I Rav Nachman, and not the second version. Rav Yehuda, the brayso continues, Ma'asav anshe beis memel v'anshe beis gurion ba-Roma. There was a situation in a place called Roma, people of beis memel, beis gurion, okay? Shayu mechalkin grogros v'tzimukin. They were giving out dried figs and raisins, right? So we are a people of chesed, it's a time of famine, and so they had food boxes, the original food boxes, they're giving out raisins, okay? It wasn't exactly, official food boxes, but whatever, it was okay. Dried raisins and dried figs, la'niyim b'shnei b'tzuros, to the poor during the years of famine, uvan aniyim kfar shichin v'aniyim kfar chananya, and the people of the village of Shichin and the village of Chananya would come, machshichin al tchum, and they would make a tchum, they would, make a Eruv tchumin with their feet, lamachros mashkin uvan, and the next day they would come. Okay, so this is a case where they're coming from their homes. So granted, they are poor, but when we said the word poor, we didn't literally mean someone who's poor versus someone who's wealthy. We meant, are you coming from your home? If you're coming from your home, you have some food in your home, right? It doesn't matter how poor a person is, we assume there's some food in their home. And this is a case where they're coming from their home, right? And yet they're making an Eruv with their feet. Right? So Yehuda says, look, people coming from their home, i.e. a wealthy person. Again, this is such a, there's something that, about just simply, whatever, something about just having a place of residence, which we just call the person an usher. A person who doesn't have any stability, that is by definition poor. A person who has some sense of stability, that is by definition an usher. So these people, even though they're not exactly there, they're coming for a handout, but at the end of the day, they're coming from their home, and yet we see that everyone agrees that this works. So this supports Rav Yehuda, who says that the making an Eruv with your feet works even in a case of an usher. Right? Fine. The bottom line is that brayso supports the version of Rav Nachman, because we have Rameir and Rav Yehuda arguing over there as to whether or not rich people, i.e. people with a home, are able to make an Eruv with their feet, and we have Rameir saying no, Rav Yehuda saying yes, and that is the version of Rav Nachman. Again, according to the second version, everyone would agree you're allowed to make an Eruv with your feet. Yeah.
There's no middle ground. It's either bread or it's your feet, right? Because in this case, they just mentioned dried figs?
No, they're coming to get dried figs. It just details the story. They don't have that yet. They know there's a box giveaway.
They could use those.
There's a
things,
box.
put them down, and they
Yeah,
go-
100%. There's a box giveaways. They know about it. They want to come and get it. Right? So what do? So they start traveling towards it because they want to get the box giveaway. Okay. Amar Ravashi. Masnisa nami daika. The Mishnah also implies Rav Nachman's correct, meaning the Mishnah we're about to read, next Mishnah. Like Tani, it says in the Mishnah, Misha yatsa leilech le'ir shem arvin la. A person goes to travel to another city. They want to make Erev Tchumen. So vechzir chavero, and the friend brings him back. Okay, so meaning two people are traveling. One of them says they set up Erev Tchumen, and a person starts walking. And his friend calls out to him. He says, "Did you see the weather report? It's going to rain. You should come back." Now he started walking already towards the other city. He already made an Erev Tchumen. He starts walking. He's walking towards the other city, and his friend calls him back. Okay, so hu mutar leilech. He's allowed to. The next day, he's allowed to go. He's allowed to continue traveling, even though he didn't make it to the middle place. He's allowed to go. But the people of the city who did not begin traveling are not allowed. Divi Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. And we ask in the Gemara, okay, what's the difference? The fact that the traveler started walking, the other guy didn't walk, what's the difference? Rav Huna explained, we're talking about a case where a person has two homes, okay, a person has a home, and there's 2,000 amos between each home. Okay, so there's 4,000 amos in between each home, and so basically a person is living in city number one. They have a house in city number one, and they have a house in city number two. They have a house in Pikesville. They have a house in Towson. It's probably too far. Let's pretend they're a little bit closer. And there's 2,000 amos in between, okay? And in between each, there's 4,000 amos in between each. And that guy is traveling to his home. He's traveling from Baltimore, from Pikesville, to his home in Towson, okay? So, the guy, because he's traveling, is considered to be a poor person. He's considered to be a poor person, and therefore, he's considered to be a poor person, and therefore he's allowed to verbally designate his Shabbos residence. In other words, since he left his home, since he's traveling from his home, he's traveling to his home as opposed to from his home. In other words, he has two homes, granted, but he's traveling to a home, and therefore we consider that to be a poor person, and therefore, even though he didn't reach that middle spot, he's able to nonetheless verbally designate his Erev, saying, the guy started walking on Erev Shabbos. In other words, he starts walking Erev Shabbos and says, I want my Erev to be in this place. Okay? And we say, then he turns around and comes back home. Okay? So we said it's a good Erev. Why is it a good Erev? Because he is a poor person. Why is he a poor person? Because a poor person is someone who is not coming from his home. Granted, he has a home over here, but he's going to his other home, and therefore we treat him as a poor person in that case. One could have heard it either way, but we treat him as a poor person in that case. Okay, v'hanach, the other people who are only coming from their home, they're not traveling to a home, ashir mninu, they're considered rich. Okay, Alma, what do we see from this whole Mishnah? Kol b'makom ploni, when we say in that place, ani in, ashalo, it's true for a poor person, but it's not true for a rich person. Shema mina, and this again matches up with the version of Rav Nachman who said that when a person wants to designate an Eruv in another place, that only works for a poor person and not for a rich person. Okay.
It's really a matter of the food. Right?
It's a matter, what do you mean it's a matter of the food?
If you're coming from your home,
yeah,
then you have the food.
Correct.
So
Correct.
That's if you set out with food.
Correct.
Even though you're not in your home, you would
Correct.
have to do
Correct.
it, right?
And that's why good. So that's why this case, good, thank you. That's why this case, even though the person is coming from a home, but since they're going to a home, in other words, if you have two, if you have a home in two places, like if you're traveling to Florida, okay, everyone here is traveling to Florida, right? You would take whatever you need. You take this and that. Canadian. What did I say about Canadian?
Canadians go to Florida.
That's true. A lot of Canadians go, okay, fine. If you're traveling to Omaha, then like a real good American, then what would you do, right? So all of us would be traveling to Omaha. What would we do? We would take with us some food, right? Because we don't have a home in Omaha, so we would take stuff. But let's say you had a home in Omaha, like a real American, then you wouldn't have to take stuff because you have your stuff there. That's exactly your point. In other words, this guy has two homes. But when he leaves home number one, since he has another home, he's not schlepping stuff. He's right now he's poor in this moment because.
So why is the food relevant to anything? The food is irrelevant. He's going to his other home.
Correct.
He has no food.
He has food over there. The point is, when we see the person traveling, how do we perceive them? Do we see them as is the person? If you're coming from a place of residence, you should be taking stuff with you. If you're going to a place of residence, we don't assume you're taking stuff with you. That's the point. Okay.
You're rich.
Sorry.
If you have two homes, you're rich.
If you have two homes, by definition, you're rich, right? We should be complete. And yeah, we're calling this guy poor, right? I mean, unbelievable. Okay,
But if you're
fair.
without something to make the Eruv with food.
Correct.
that would fall in the
I
category
think it was a
of-
joke. Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, Masler Rav Chia bar Ashi Lechia bar Rav. Rav Chia bar Ashi taught the Mishnah to Chia, the son of Rav. Echad ani v'achad asher. And he said whether a poor person or a rich person is allowed to establish an Eruv without placing an actual Eruv. Okay, Amrle Rav. And Rav overheard this, the father overheard this and said, Sayim Nami, conclude the lesson by teaching, Halacha Rav Yehuda, Halacha follows Rav Yehuda. This is like the version of Rav Nachman's Rav Yehuda, who says that refers only to a person who designates his current location as a Shabbos residence, right? In other words, according to the version of Nachman, that a person could go ahead and establish their current residence with their feet. Okay, but right, Rav Yehuda holds not some other place, but only in your own place. Exactly. Rav Chanan have a ragel to asi me'artivna lepumpadisa. Rav Chanan, one of the sages, would travel from Artivna to Pumpadisa. Amar, he says, Teshvisasi b'tzinta, and he would say, in other words, these are two places, and the only way to get from place A to place B was having an Eruv in a place in the middle. But he wouldn't place an Eruv. Rather, he would say, let my Shabbos residence be in Sinta, like that was a landmark in between. So what is he doing? It's not b'makom b'mkomi. He's not making an Eruv in his place. He's at home. Erev Shabbos. But he wants to travel to the next city to go give shir on Shabbos afternoon. So he says, let my Erev be in that landmark in the middle. Okay? Now, what's that? So is that a case? What's that a case of? That's a case where it is is he wealthy or poor? He's wealthy. He's coming from a home, right? And he's saying, my Erev should be somewhere else. I'm going to lay a bayah. Where are you getting this from? Rameir Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, because of the fact that there's machlok between Rameir and Yehuda, and we know the lachos Rabbi Yehuda. V'amar Rav Chizra says machlok makom ploni. The machlokes they disagree when I say in that place. So you're going like the version of you're going like Rabbi Yehuda. He says, okay, that's good. But there is a conflicting view about what they're arguing about, and Rav Nachman disagrees with that version. In other words, yes, you ruled like Rav Yehuda in the version of Rav Chisda, who says that a wealthy person is allowed to make an Eruv in that place without being there. But that only goes like Rav Yehuda in the version of Rav Chisda. Rav Nachman, again, the first version, Rav Nachman disagreed and said only a poor person is allowed to say in that place. But a rich person, Rav Yehuda would agree. And so therefore he says, what you're doing is not according to the halacha. Amrale, Hadribi, he says, I retract my ruling, I will not continue this. Beautiful. We learned the humility from, right? It's like such an amazing thing. Imagine like they would quote in a story, in the article book, Ramosha Feinstein was doing, XYZ for many, 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 many years. And he was violating halacha. And one day, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach bumped into him and he said, you're doing the wrong thing. Rav Moshe Feinstein said, you're right. And he stopped doing it. Unbelievable, right? This is a real Gadol story. This is a real Gadol story. He made a mistake and he said, I'm wrong. And he said, I'm wrong. And he stopped doing it. That's godless. Okay. Have a great day.